Here is Mr. Eddie Torres at the Hong Kong Salsa Festival. Hello, Eddie.
Hi there.
Hi. Um, is this the first time that you actually come to China? And what do you think salsa or mambo is doing in Asia?
Well, this is my first time in Hong Kong. And yes, by way of China, this is my first time in China. And of course, here we are at the Hong Kong Salsa Festival, my very first visit here to Hong Kong. And I've been to Japan and twice. And I haven't had a chance yet to really visit this incredible city. But for the little bit that I see, it seems very fascinating. I'm looking at it, I'm saying, my goodness, this actually makes New York look very tranquil and quiet. There's so much going on here. It's a cosmopolitan, full of rich culture here. And I would hope that before I leave, I can get a chance to see a little bit of it. But here I am in Hong Kong, and I've had a wonderful weekend so far.
Right. Well, 5 years ago, we had an interview with you. And how did you think that salsa mambo developed actually in the world and also actually in Asia?
I think everything, like I was saying this yesterday, I think everything starts way back if you want to really kind of go to the root. Starts all in Africa with the drums, and of course the influence from Africa to, I believe, Cuba. Cuba is such a rich, and I'd say Cuba needs to be recognized, and people need to give credit to the Cubans for what they have contributed, culturally speaking, to this beautiful music that we call salsa today, and of course the names of mambo, cha-cha. But if you really want to get down to the root of it, I'd say you have to say this is really from Africa to Cuba, Afro-Cuban music. And so the Cubans, of course, in the early 40s, started coming to New York. Promoters started bringing the Cuban bands. And in New York, in the 40s, they started this whole, I would say, craze. They call it the Mambo era. And of course, everyone who's into this dance has heard the word Palladium. And Palladium was a nightclub in New York City, and that was one of the clubs where the promoters started to bring all of these incredible bands from Cuba. They brought Arsenio Rodriguez, they brought Benny Moré, Machito and his Afro-Cubans, and they started to have parties there at this club called the Palladium. And the Palladium was a club right in the middle of Manhattan on 52nd Street and Broadway. And I was too young to go to the Palladium because this is mid 40s to maybe early 60s. But everyone hears these fantastic stories about the Palladium because you had the great band leaders, especially Tito Puente, which was he was a regular at the Palladium. You had Tito Rodriguez, you had Machito's band, and along with all these other great talents that they would bring there. And one of the attractions that the Palladium had, which also made it very popular, as I understand, was that you would have the movie stars come in, like for example, you had Harry Belafonte, you had Marlon Brando, Elizabeth Taylor, Eartha Kitt, Sammy Davis Jr. I mean, this was an attraction because people would say, "Oh my gosh, I just saw Elizabeth Taylor at the Palladium, or I saw Marlon Brando." And I understand that Marlon Brando would actually sit in with the band and play little bongos and little percussion. So that became a very attractive place for people to go dance. Not to mention because the music was amazing. You had Tito Puente, which, as you all know, that's been my favorite music and my favorite band, my favorite orchestra. And you had Tito Rodriguez, and of course everyone knows there was that little rivalry between Tito Puente and Tito Rodriguez. But there, I would have to say, became the real melting pot and the real, I'd say, a lot of the development of the dance and the music when it came to New York, it started there in the Palladium and in clubs in New York City because as I remember growing up in New York City, the Palladium was one of the clubs, but there were many clubs. There were many clubs. I'll name a few. You had the Casablanca, you had the Corso, you had the Chez Sensual. Oh my goodness! In Manhattan alone, there might have been, let's say, 15 clubs, and they all featured Latin music. And so, the 50s, I think, was a good time culturally speaking. There was a good vibe in the air. There was I think those were just good days in general because you hear the people say, "Wow, I wish I can go back to the 50s," there was something very, very mystical, very beautiful about that era. It was the era of elegance where the guys would go dancing very sharply dressed with their suits and their ties and their handkerchiefs, and the ladies all decked out in their beautiful dresses. And not to say that today's not like that, but it was just such a different time. And there, in during that generation, we had so much live music, which I think makes a big difference. Because today, I live in New York City still, and very few places sponsor and feature Latin music anymore. And of course, economics plays a big role in this, but you hardly ever see big bands anymore. Back in those days, Tito Puente had like, let's say, 12, 14 musicians in his orchestra, and you had big bands, and it was just a great, great era. And so I would say from New York became the central place where this music and this dance started to really, really grow. And from New York, then it started going out all over America and all over the world, I would say. So New York, it takes a lot of credit for the promotion and the development of this whole scene, this dance scene that today we call salsa. But back in the day, the music and the dances, it wasn't called salsa. The music rhythms were called mambo and cha-cha-cha and bolero. And the mambo, I would say, I would have to say was the most popular. At one point, they said that the mambo in New York was the most popular dance of all, and the cha-cha-cha. And then, of course, between the 40s and 70s, you had surgence of different rhythms coming in. For example, the the rhythm called charanga, which today we dance pachanga. And actually, they referred to the music as charanga music, which consists the actual instrumentation to authenticate a charanga band would be a rhythm section, but it would consist of violins and a flute. That really made the authentic sounds of what charanga is, the violin and the flute. And then later on, as I saw, they started adding horns and everything to the sound. But then Johnny Pacheco, I think, was one of the real big names and the key person to help promote that sound. He recorded a CD, which back in then it wasn't CDs, it was LPs. And he recorded an LP called Pacheco y su Charanga. And I think until today, it's probably one of his most best-selling CDs ever. And so with that sound, we started seeing a new dance. The new kid on the block in dance was the pachanga. And I remember I saw the pachanga for the first time, not in New York. I was living in Puerto Rico in maybe the mid 60s, and I saw people dancing pachanga. And I didn't know what it was, but it looked like it was fun, and it looked like it was very aerobic. A lot of jumping around and moving. So the pachanga came in and it kind of settled in with the mambo and the cha-cha. And then you also, within that same frame of time period, you had a dance called the cha-cha boogaloo, which is simply, the boogaloo comes from dances which are not so much, let's say, known as Latin dances, but they're like uh, street dances, and it was popular, known as the funky dances that we did in the street. And let's say the black people in New York used to do, like James Brown. I think he's the author of boogaloo, because what you see James Brown do back in the days, you started to see it in the cha-cha-cha, the bobbing of the head, and that funky movement that we saw started to incorporate itself in the cha-cha. And the music and the ones that I remember that made that very popular now was the band leader by the name of Joe Cuba. Joe Cuba, and there was another one by the name of Pete Rodriguez, and now we have two Pete Rodriguez in New York, one that sang with Johnny Pacheco, but not him. We had a band leader named Pete Rodriguez, and he came out with a couple of CDs, and he had hit tunes like I Like It Like That, and then one of the big, big, big hits that I remember of Boogaloo Cha-Cha was a tune called Bang Bang, which just in the last maybe 3 weeks, I have my own little orchestra. It's called the Eddie Torres Mambo Kings Orchestra, and I play nothing but old school music. My book is nothing but the classic music of all the great band leaders from back in the day. I have in my book music by Tito Puente, music by Eddie Palmieri, Joe Cuba, Ray Barretto, Harlow, you name it, and I play that type of music because I think that music was so great, and I think we should try to keep it alive. And so we did a tribute because unfortunately, less than a month ago, we lost one of the lead singers for Joe Cuba. His name is Jimmy Sabatel, and he just passed on. And that very week, I was supposed to be playing at a place in New York called the Westgate Lounge, and so I prepared a little tribute to Jimmy Sabater, which is on YouTube. And we had our lead singer, Frankie Vasquez, sang a tribute. One of the biggest hits that Jimmy Sabater had was a ballad by the name of "To Be With You." So we played that in honor and in tribute to him, and we did Bang Bang, which was another, like, I can't tell you how big that was. When that tune came out, I was maybe 15 years old, and I used to go to house parties because I was too young to go to clubs. But I remember in every house party, one of the tunes you heard throughout the night was Bang Bang. Beep beep, beep beep, oh, that, as simple as that was, that created such a frenzy and such a good time wherever and whenever it was played. And until today, I think people still hear that tune, and it has the same effect. It was just an amazing, simple little tune named Bang Bang. And we also did that at the Westgate. And I think what I do now is I'm so aware of how great of the era of the 60s, 70s that I grew up in. I remember all the good times I had and such good music that we were dancing to. So I'm kind of becoming more and more a traditionalist these days. I'm trying to teach and keep the old school because it's what I know.